Welcome, friend. I'm TK, your tour guide to the past, and you are listening to For the Love of History, the podcast where we talk about world history, women's history, and weird history. Food. Food is essential for our survival. From the delicious to the disgusting, we need food. But not just any food. Good food. To keep us alive. And for the most part, food does its job. But that, dear one, is a recent phenomenon. For just a few decades ago, eating your morning Wheaties and sipping a cup of coffee was just as dangerous as working in a coal mine. And those dangers didn't just end at the dining room table. Food disasters could strike down a pedestrian at any moment, and many an ill fate has been met at the liquidy hands of delicious beverages. Today, dear one, we are learning about the ridiculous, unnecessary, and deadly history of food disasters. But first, if you could do me a teeny-weeny little favor and like and subscribe if you're watching over on YouTube, and if you're watch listening on your favorite listening platform, do me a favor and go ahead and leave a cheeky little rating and review, because those are some great free 99 ways to help support the podcast and let other potential history besties know, hey, this is a really good podcast. You should come over here. You should watch it because we're having a good time. Except when we talk about people dying. Not a good time, but we make it a good time. I don't know. You know what I mean. Anyways, with that out of the way, it is time to grab your lead kit and a snack, hop in the time machine, and let's get to it. It's Monday morning, and you're a factory worker in the ever-industrializing heart of the United States. You pour yourself a cup of coffee, and because it's the start of the week, you dump a cheeky little spoonful of sugar and a splash of milk into your hot bean juice. You take a long, deep sip, and in a few minutes, you down the whole thing. Congratulations, you've just poisoned yourself in 3 different ways. And you have been for the past several months, because the coffee, sugar, and milk that you have been buying are bootleg knockoffs that the grocer has been cutting with formaldehyde, plaster-of-Paris, lead, crushed glass, and powdered bones. Whose bones? Who knows? Not I, but bones. The food safety regulations that we have today are terrifyingly recent laws. The granola parents and essential oil MLM girlies of the day would spontaneously combust if they knew that red dye number 40 was the least of their concerns a little over a generation ago. Before the 1930s, when the FDA was created, the food industry was worse than the Wild West. There were no regulations and no laws pertaining to food quality and safety in the United States before the 1900s. The very first laws regarding food came in 1906 in the form of the Food and Drug Act, but not because the government was like, oh no, people are dying, we have to protect them. Nay, dear one. It came from embarrassment. The author Upton Sinclair completely demolished the meat industry when he wrote the book The Jungle, not to be confused with The Jungle Book, exposing their disgusting and downright derelict practices. This book became incredibly popular, and meat sales took a hit, and the government was like, oh shit, it's time to cover our negligent little heinies and do something about this. But even then, it took nearly 27 years for the act to be implemented and regulated across the United States, in no small part due to pushback from companies and citizens. On the company's part, regulations take time and money, and they don't like anything that cuts in to their money. And on the part of the citizens, some people said, well, I think it's a good thing to have no regulations because I don't want the government telling me what kind of num-nums I can put in my tum-tums. Okay, all right. And to that, I say, well, people of the past, you're wrong. And I know that sentiment echoes the feelings of some individuals in our modern day. Not you, of course, dear one, never you. You are perfect in every way, and don't forget that. But I guarantee to those people who have those feelings, you will be thankful for regulation, at the very least food regulation, at the end of this episode. But I digress. Food and beverage historians call the 1900s the Great American Stomach Ache, for good reason. Like I said, there were essentially no laws or regulations about what you could put in food and how to keep food safe. This meant literally anyone could produce food and put anything in it and face no legal consequences if someone got sick or died. And that went for any type of food or beverage, from coffee to tea to milk to sugar, spices, and infant formula. In the early 1900s, a study was conducted by Harvey Washington Wiley and a few of his scientific associates from Purdue University. They tested various household products like cinnamon, pepper, coffee flour, and milk, and found diabolical additives. If you think ingredient padding and concealing of ingredients is bad now, back in the 1900s, food companies and grocers would cut their products with additives to stretch them out and gain more profit. And it was insane. We're not talking about, hey, let's put a little bit more sugar in the honey to stretch it out or water down our coffee. No. We're talking about grinding up seashells, horse hooves, and lead and putting it in coffee, gypsum in flour, plaster-of-Paris, and formaldehyde, I think that's the thing that you embalm people with, in milk. And may the sweet, sweaty Lord Sobek help you if you were to buy pepper or spices because you were just buying a bag of trash that would kill you. For real. Not being facetious, because Harvey and his science friends found that if you were buying pepper, you were essentially buying dirt or charred and ground up rope. And the worst offender of all was cinnamon, which had a 90% adulteration rate, meaning you were buying a bag of brick dust that someone had thought about cinnamon next to. You would get more cinnamon content if someone whispered the word cinnamon into your ear after eating a cinnamon roll. That's how bad it was. And baby formula? Well, there was essentially no nutrition in many baby formulas on the market in the early 1900s. It's no exaggeration or stretch of the imagination to say that the food and beverages of the 1900s in the United States were literally killing people for profit. The more product grocers could sell, the more money they made. And who cared if a few people got sick or died? They were lining their pockets. But this was not limited to the United States. In the episode, The Deadly History of Tea, a few seasons back, we discussed the same phenomenon in Europe as a whole, and specifically in England, in relation to the Victorian tea craze, because it's always the Victorians. They're always up to some shit. Okay, so it's not just the United States doing out-of-pocket stuff with food. However, that is where we are focusing on today. Until the FDA was created, and even a little bit after that, often to eat was to risk your life if you were anyone outside of the 1%. The Richie Riches could access good, nutritious, and healthy food, but for people of the growing middle class and the working poor, it was a gamble. In the cities, finding healthy and affordable food was like searching for the Holy Grail. And because of the housing situations, with most workers living in tenements, there was no way for these people who had moved from the countryside into the city to grow their own food. They were essentially in a nutrition and food desert. There was nothing else they could do. And so, as often as it is with the world, the poor suffered. But unfortunately, the dangers of food did not stop at the dinner table. It is a wonder that humans have lived this long. Most of human history is just us kind of figuring shit out. And in my 32 years of life, I have figured out that pretty much nobody knows what the hell they're doing and what's going on. And that goes doubly for the people of the late 18 and early 1900s during the Industrial Revolution. The big barons of industry during the first and second waves of industrialization were operating on Dr. Evil vibes and motivated by money alone. Giant textile machines were being created to replace piecework and household fabric making. Huge water and later electrical-powered mills were replacing hand-ground wheat and flour production. Factories of all kinds were popping up like Pop-Mart blah-boo-boo vending machines. And much like Elon Muskrat and his tech bro sycophants, the robber barons of the Industrial Revolution were moving fast and breaking things. The things in question being people. P.S. and by the way, the term robber baron is used to refer to dudes who gained enormous wealth through less than morally correct means. AKA they did some incredibly unethical and violent shit to make money. Those robber barons include J.D. Rockefeller, Cornelius Vanderbilt, J.P. Morgan, Andrew Carnegie, and many more. And just between you and me, friend, they were not captains of industry. They were criminals. But I digress. The food industry was no stranger to these tech bro tactics. Like we discussed earlier, there were no regulations regarding the contents and quality of the food, but there were also no regulations on the creation, transportation, and containment of food as well. Machine maintenance and safety regulations were non-existent during the majority of the Industrial Revolution. And because of the prevalence of textile factories and the huge technological advances in that area, much of our information on safety or lack thereof comes from these places. Not a lot is written down about food factories and food safety maintenance. But I have a degree in nosy ass lady, aka history, and I did find some information in the research paper titled Historical Overview of Maintenance Management Strategies, Development from Breakdown Maintenance to Predictive Maintenance in accordance with the 4 Industrial Revolutions. Riveting. No hate to that researcher. But I did that for you, okay? I read through this 12-page long paper for you so that we could be informed because I love you and I want you to be an informed little donut so that when you go to your next little party, you can either trap people or bore people with the information from this from this research paper. So you're welcome. You're welcome. And if anything, that deserves a like. But I digress. Let's dig in to what I actually found in this paper. So, maintenance of industrial machinery and containment receptacles during the 1900s was conducted on a looks pretty good from here basis and send in the kit if it's broken, meaning there were no regulations and no inspection quotas, nothing. They just looked at it, and if it seemed okay, then it must have been okay. There was no testing for structural integrity, there was no testing to see if something was safe, and there was definitely nothing at all that said children probably shouldn't go inside of a giant machine because more often than not, kids would be sent into dangerous places to fix or check on whatever they thought was broken. And if they died in the process, it was no big deal to these robber barons. For them, it was cheaper to let workers get killed than it was to fix a maintenance problem. According to the Economic History Association, in a survey taken in 1900, only half of the families of workers who were fatally injured recovered any sort of money, and their average compensation only amounted to about half a year's pay. And that's when the workers died. Half a year's pay? Half a year's pay? It does not compute. It does not compute in my brain. It's insane, but it gets worse because the workers who were just injured or severely injured to the point of not being able to work anymore were given even less money. What? And don't even get me started on the children that worked in these factories. They were not even considered people, really, and would oftentimes not be compensated at all for injury. And their families would be given little to no money if they died. And that is the kind of shit these robber barons were all about. They did not care as long as the money was coming. And the food industry faced a very unique form of what the fuckery when it came to maintenance. Food could easily become contaminated in improperly stored receptacles. Nobody was checking what went into the food. There were no consequences for these robber barons injuring or killing consumers of their product and workers in their factories. The food itself was dangerous, but also the factories and containment receptacles were dangerous. Both workers and pedestrians faced death at the hands of mishandled items, and no incident was more deadly and impactful than the Great Molasses Flood of 1919. January 15th, 1919. It was an unseasonably warm day. This January day in Boston, Massachusetts was not a tropical vacation, but the sun was beating down without mercy. The folks of North End Park were going about their tasks, which mostly included industrial shipping and containment. Factory work. Not much passed through the international waters onto the East Coast without first coming to Boston. Crude molasses was one such product, shipped from the Caribbean sugar plantations to Boston in order to make rum. A new shipment had arrived the day before, and a handful of workers were checking if things were ship-shape, giving the enormous wooden tank a once-over. There were leaks, of course, but there were always leaks. There always had been leaks. In fact, the tank leaked so much that it was not unusual for neighborhood kids to bring little pails and buckets to collect the runoff. So the workers paid these leaks no mind, because they were told not to. As the workers sat near the vat taking a quick afternoon break, the molasses container moaned and wailed and suddenly exploded. In the blink of an eye, an 8-foot-tall wall of hot molasses burst forth from the tank. All 2.5 million gallons of molten molasses was out of the tank and rushing down the north end. Unfortunately, the inspection workers stood no chance against the sugary tidal wave. Hell, the fire department, freight cars, and train line support beams were also all swept away in the current of sweet death. There was nothing that they could do. As the river of molasses grew momentum, the gooey mass reached 15 feet in height and 100 yards wide. And for the non-American delicious donuts, that's 5 meters high and 100 meters wide. And it covered 2 full blocks. It swept away not only buildings, but people and horses used in the various factories and shops. It crushed steel, bent iron, and destroyed cement buildings. The initial flood took only minutes, but the devastation was lasting. As the molasses came to a halt, one would think that the danger would be over, but it had only just begun. As the winter weather began cooling the molten molasses, it became harder and harder to release oneself from the sticky quicksand. Imagine those horrendous sticky mouse traps that people used to use back in the day, but that was the whole 2-block area. It was almost impossible to walk through. Rescue missions were deployed for days, but with each passing night, the molasses got stickier and trapped these people like flies, gluing twisted steel freight cars to the cement, making rescue nearly impossible. It took months for hundreds of workers and volunteers to clean up the area, and even longer to rescue the unfortunate victims of the flood. The remains of one victim, a wagon driver named Cesar Nicolo, were not fished out of the nearby Boston Harbor until almost 4 months after the flood. The final death toll was 61 people, dozens of horses, and 150 injuries. The Boston Harbor remained brown for nearly 6 months after the tragedy, and the smell of molasses lingered for years. When the dust finally settled and the shock wore off, everyone had the same question. How could something like this happen? And who do we have to blame? The owner of the giant tank was the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, so naturally people turned to them for an explanation. And the one they gave makes my blood boil. This, air quotes, explosion happened during a uptick in domestic terrorism from Italian anarchist groups, and the United States Industrial Alcohol Company was all too happy to blame those un-American Italians. It was their fault, and they were the ones that blew up the tank, so we should be mad at them. United States Industrial Alcohol Company, they had nothing to do with the explosion at all. In fact, they were also the victims. But the people of Boston, in the most Bostonian of fashions, said, "Listen, pal, we know you're fucking lying, so we're taking your ass to court." I did a very good Bostonian accent. Let me know what you think. Anyways, initially 119 different lawsuits against the United States Industrial Alcohol Company were filed, but eventually they got turned into one giant lawsuit that dragged on for 5 years. And in that time, over 1,500 exhibits were introduced, and some say 1,000, some sources say 3,000 witnesses testified. And these witnesses included explosive experts, flood survivors, United States Industrial Alcohol employees, and many more. They argued that the molasses tank had been too thin and shoddily built to safely hold its contents. The Bostonians did not come to play, and eventually their efforts paid off. According to History.com, quote, the closing arguments alone took 11 weeks, but in April 1925, State Auditor Hugh W. Ogden finally ruled that the United States Industrial Alcohol Company was to blame for the disaster. Rather than a bomb, he concluded that the company's poor planning and lack of oversight had led to the tank's structural failure. USIA would later pay the flood victims and their family members $628,000 in damages, which is equivalent to around $8 million today. Later on, more information would come out about the incident, revealing information that is going to bring out Spicy TK something fierce, okay? Listen to this shit. So, the United States Industrial Alcohol Company never once consulted with an engineer at any point in time to make sure that the tank was structurally sound. No. No experts, either externally or internally in the company, analyzed the construction. What do you mean? What do you mean? I don't understand. How is that allowed? How was that allowed? Okay, but it gets worse. It gets absolutely worse, okay? In a 2009 deep dive by a writer at the Daily Kos, not only did the USIA fail to conduct regular inspections of the tank during and after the construction, but the company's leadership completely ignored concerns from both inside and outside the organization regarding the safety of the project. Citizens were coming to the company management telling them, hey, I don't think that this tank is supposed to sound like it's a dying whale on the beach. I don't think it's supposed to be groaning like this. I don't think it's supposed to be leaking like this. And people from within said, hey, I don't think it's very good that we're just covering up the leaks with brown paint. Brown paint. What are we talking about here? What are we actually talking about? They patched up molasses leaks with brown paint. But what were we to expect? What were we to expect from the robber barons who once again showed that money meant more to them than human life? What? I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed because the same shit is happening today. And history does not repeat, but it sure as shit rhymes. But dear one, as we always do, we end the episode on something more on the uplifting side. There is a silver lining to this disaster, if it can even be said to have one, after such a tragedy. But in response to the Great Molasses Flood, safety laws and regulations dramatically changed. Much like the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire changed the textile industry, the Great Molasses Flood changed the food safety industry, and also just manufacturing regulation safety in general. And none of that could have been accomplished if it were not for the people of Boston. And the legacy of those stubborn-ass Bostonians remind us that the robber barons of old and new cannot defeat the people, because people are stronger and more important than profit. And we should never forget that. Well, dear one, we have come to our final thought, and I have to tell you about the Dublin Whiskey Fire that killed 13 people. Because when I read about the story, my flabbers were gasted. Okay, when I was doing my research, looking at food disasters, I was like, oh, what? That's exactly what I said. So, long story short, on June 18th of 1875 in Dublin, Ireland, a whiskey distillery inventory warehouse caught on fire, and 5,000 barrels of whiskey exploded, creating a river of flaming whiskey that was 2 feet wide, 6 inches deep, and 400 meters long. And for the non-American delicious donuts, that's 15 centimeters deep and like half of a meter wide, which doesn't sound like a lot until you remember it's a whiskey river that's on fire. That it's a flaming river. Which is any size of flaming river is too big. It's absolutely too big. But the fact that the whiskey was on fire did not stop the men of Dublin from going to the whiskey river of fire and taking any receptacle, including but not limited to their shoes, and drinking from the river. In your nasty shoes? In your nasty work shoes? I know they did not have many pairs of shoes at that time. So y'all know that that was some rank whiskey. It was ripe. It was smelling like feet. But what takes this story over the edge more than the whiskey river shoes is that even though the fire destroyed the distillery and about 2 blocks of tightly packed tenement housing, not a soul was killed in the fire. Not a single soul was killed in the fire. But TK, you said that 13 people died because of this whiskey river fire situation. I know I did. But the deaths did not come from the fires. All 13 deaths came from alcohol poisoning. And I know it's not funny. It's not funny, but it's also hilarious. These fellas drank themselves to death with their flaming boot-flavored whiskey. 13 grown men went to the hospital and passed away, but even more had alcohol-related injuries. Dozens and dozens of people went to the hospital because they drank too much. Thankfully, the majority of them recovered, but 13 of them died. And I didn't know what to do with this information, so I needed to tell you. I needed to tell you about this because now it's in my brain, and now you need to know about it. Now spread the word, my little history monkey. I feel like the Wicked Witch of the West. Fly, my pretties, fly! Tell unhinged history facts to people all over the world. And that energy is just for the people that watch to the end of the episode. And with that, I'm gonna leave it here. We're gonna end. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate you sticking to the very end of the episode. It really, really helps. And if you haven't already, go ahead and leave a rating or review if you're listening to the podcast over on your favorite listening platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. And share this or any episode with someone who you think needs to be converted into a history bestie. Remember, we're not a cult. We're just a club. A very close club. Thank you for being here in whatever way you choose to support the podcast. If you'd like to join us over on Patreon, we've got lots of fun bonus stuff there. You can get some merch that's super duper cute. And yeah, that's all. Okay. I love you. I will see you next week when we talk about our very first evil Empress baddie. Ooh, so exciting. And with that, I will tell you to grab your beverage, preferably a water. Take a little sippy sip. Let's do it together. Go outside, touch some grass, do something that makes you happy this week. Take care of yourself. Remember, I love you. And I will see you in the next episode. Okay. Love you. Bye. Goodbye, goodbye. I've had too much coffee today. No. Look at how good this is. Will you look at this? Oh, it's so good. I feel so cool. Why didn't I dress up more in previous seasons? Do you like it? I love this. I really enjoy this look that I have on my face and my hair. Are we sufficiently bouffanted? Do we have enough at the top? We do. We're very... What would I do if somebody else was here while I was doing? Pretty good. Feel pretty nifty. Feeling good. Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh! Why do I automatically go to... Okay. Oh, yes. Calm down. Okay. Ready. No, we're not. We need a sip of the water. Did my camera die again? Sure did. Sure did.